The year 2015 has drawn to a close, and it's hard to remember a year as significant as this one, economically speaking, of course. So we have dedicated 2 shows for you to review. Stay tuned as we bring you the highlights of the ups and downs of the financial year and how it impacted societies around the world. So thinking back on the year 2015, what stands out in your mind? Now that most likely would be a difficult one to answer, but one of the countries that we covered, since it had a lot of major economic news coming out of it, is the United States. Economic news coming out of the U.S. was plenty, naturally, since as one of the biggest economies in the world, its activities does impact societies as a whole, both within and outside of the country. But first, let's start with the basic question, whether America was the greatest country in the world, followed by a study which revealed 12 signs that America was on the decline.
Can you say why America is the greatest country in the world?
Hi, everybody.
What about the people? Why is America
not the greatest country in the world, Professor? That's my answer.
12 signs that America is on the decline.
But we're not doing well enough.
There is some uncertainties in the economic outlook.
But what do you really think the U.S. economy looks like right now?
A lot of our corporations are sending our jobs overseas.
Because without educated people, you can't have good healthcare workers, you can't have good manufacturers.
We're 7th in literacy, 27th in math, 22nd in science, 3rd in median household income.
You have a generation or generation after generation of people who take handouts.
A major issue which plagued the U.S. this past year was gun violence. We looked at how that impacted American communities.
315 and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters, 14300 East Alameda Avenue.
Guns and violence are a part of the American way. It goes back to the history and the founding of this country.
Moving to other economic issues plaguing the U.S., this one was serious, but because it really shows the depth of U.S.'s economy struggling to perform. U.S. states facing economic challenges, namely Puerto Rico and California.
California has a crisis.
Is it a budget crisis?
Because the money isn't there.
Or a drought crisis?
Today I'm declaring a drought emergency.
This is as bad as we've ever seen it.
Los Angeles is good for one more year.
Severe drought.
Whose fault is it then? Does it cause income inequality?
You know what? We didn't deserve this.
Like on Rodeo Drive. But who can afford that? The tech workers at Silicon Valley.
Top 400 richest Americans, they have more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans put together.
And there's plenty of money in California. It's not as if it's a poor state. It's the richest state in the nation. It's just that the people who once were paying for it, the wealthy, no longer are.
The island nation of Puerto Rico, part of the U.S. mainland, more than any U.S. state governments except California and New York.
The United States cannot be preaching about freedom and democracy worldwide in Iraq and Afghanistan. Then you have 3.5 million American citizens who can't vote for the President of the United States, especially when Puerto Rican soldiers go to war and they die for our nation and they can't vote for the commander-in-chief.
On to Europe now. Our first stop there is the UK. The state of UK's economy has been the subject of much debate on whether it is doing well or not. How the UK economy did this past year was a hard one to figure out. One month it was okay, another month performing poorly. And these kinds of views came from politicians and analysts.
It's clearly taking longer.
And it looks like maybe some sort of momentum.
The British economy is finally bigger than it was.
It is worsening. Good news.
So which is it? Is UK's economy doing well or not?
2012, 2013, 2014, a big pickup in growth.
You could call it a blip as the economy goes along.
Does that mean growth?
A lot of the growth we've seen recently, UK consumers, their disposable income has increased.
We've invested in our NHS as well as reducing the deficit.
Economic myths versus reality. Myth 1. The government's spending cuts are the best way to shrink the deficit. Reality. Cameron's government inherited a growing economy and a falling deficit. Since then, the economy has stagnated and the deficit has grown. Which brings us to the election of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the anti-austerity opposition Labour Party, UK's best chance for the poor and underprivileged. Jeremy Corbyn, a political earthquake.
There's no security for 2.8 million households in Britain forced into debt by stagnating wages and the Tory record of the longest fall in living standards since records began.
Africa is a vast continent and it is rich in minerals such as iron ore, cobalt, copper, and of course the two that it's most famous for, gold and platinum. But if Africa is rich in minerals, why is it so poor?
Africa does have an opportunity to use this enormous mineral wealth to improve the conditions on the continent and improve the lot of the people of this continent.
Ethiopia, a booming economy.
From the time that Meles Zenawi took over, we've seen political stability.
One of the highest GDPs in Africa. A construction boom in the capital Addis Ababa.
The basic engine blocks of economic transformation are the infrastructure.
Why then such a high rate of poverty? The number of hungry Ethiopians needing food aid had risen sharply due to poor rains. Around 7.5 million people were now in need. That number has nearly doubled since August, when the United Nations said that 4.5 million were in need. That does it for part one of our two-part series, Economic Divide, the year 2015 in review. Do join us for part two next week, and make sure to give us your comments on how we did covering economic news for you from this past year. You can find us on the links below, including Press TV Facebook page under Programs. It's goodbye until next week.